The air in the Velvet Monarch tasted of Hudson River chill, cigar smoke, and secrets traded in six-figure whispers. Eileen J. O'Neill's fingers coaxed a minor chord from the Steinway, the vibration thrumming like the subway beneath Soho as the golden spotlight pinned her white silk gown to the stage. 6 months of nightly sets in this meatpacking district palace, and she still hadn't mastered vanishing behind the melody. A server darted past, crystal flutes clinking, one tipped, spilling Prosecco across the marble and soaking the hem of her dress like melted snow. "My bad," she murmured, though no one heard. The city's elite never heard the pianist until tonight. Velvet ropes cordoned the raised booth at the rear, like a throne above the skyline. The Monarch's hostess, Delphine, had drilled it into every musician, eyes on the keys, never on the owner's table, especially on Fridays, when Edward H. Jones sometimes descended from his penthouse. Eileen had glimpsed him once, a shadow ringed by bodyguards and diamonds, the kind of man whose silence drowned out the Hudson horns. Co-workers whispered his legend in the green room, how at 34 he owned half of Manhattan's after-dark empire, how rivals vanished into the East River, how even NYPD brass looked away. Eileen didn't care about legends. She needed the gig to cover the rent on a walk-up in Washington Heights that smelled of curry and regret. Security parted the rope without a word. She carried a single glass of Macallan 25 to the booth, eyes lowered, the broken crystal crunching softly beneath her heels like thin ice on the reservoir. "Your scotch, Mr. Jones," she said, voice barely threading the jazz. "Wait." The single syllable locked her knees. Heart hammering, she lifted her gaze a fraction. The booth held 2 women in black sequins and a man she'd never seen, blonde, drunk, already sneering. But the man who spoke pulled every watt of light toward him. Dark hair slicked back, neck tattoo crawling above a crisp white collar, eyes the color of gunmetal. His tuxedo jacket hung open, revealing the edge of more ink. He wasn't looking at her yet. His hand simply rose, one finger extended. "Stay." "Sir," she managed. The blonde heir laughed, sloshing his drink. "Is it entertainment? She plays like a funeral. Come on, sweetheart. Dance with me instead." Eileen's breath caught. The room blurred. Then the powerful man's gaze snapped up. It traveled her face, lingered on her trembling hands, dropped to the Prosecco stain blooming across white silk. Something flickered. Annoyance, recognition, hunger. "Eileen," he said, tasting the name like aged whiskey. "Bring the gentleman a replacement." A pause. His stare pinned the air. "And bring yourself a new dress from the wardrobe. That one is ruined." It wasn't a request. She fled to the backstage corridor, pulse roaring. Delphine found her wrestling a spare ivory gown over shaking limbs. "You okay? You look like death warmed over." "I'm fine," Eileen lied. "Just a spilled drink and a VIP." Delphine's eyes widened. "Tell me it wasn't." Eileen nodded. "Listen," Delphine hissed, "Edward Jones doesn't see people unless he wants something. Be careful." Their stage manager barked from the doorway. "O'Neill, back on in 2. Jones wants the Brahms intermezzo again. Move." The night blurred into ivory keys and golden light. She delivered the heir's replacement, slipped back to the piano, certain the moment had passed. But when the final set ended and the spotlight dimmed, a shadow fell across the keys. Edward H. Jones stood there, hand extended, city lights glinting off broken glass at his feet. "Dance with me," he said, voice low enough to drown the room. "He'll see you're taken." She placed her hand in his. The orchestra swelled. Every gaze in the Velvet Monarch locked on them. On her, for the first time in her life. And in that single turn across the marble floor, beneath the shadow of the Empire State, Eileen J. O'Neill's quiet, invisible world cracked wide open. The waltz ended with a final, lingering note from the strings. Edward's hand lingered at the small of her back for a beat longer than the music required, his thumb brushing the silk as if testing its reality. Then he released her. No bow, no smile, just a curt nod to the bandleader and a murmured instruction to one of his men. The crowd exhaled, champagne flutes rising in nervous toasts, but Eileen felt the weight of their stares like wet wool on her skin. She slipped back to the piano bench on legs that didn't feel like hers, fingers finding the keys by muscle memory alone. The Brahms intermezzos spilled out, softer than before, as if the ivory itself were bruised. Edward returned to his booth. The blonde air was gone. In his place sat a fresh glass of Macallan, and a single white rose laid across the leather seat like an offering. Eileen didn't look up again until the house lights dimmed and the last patron drifted into the night. Only then did she notice the two new shadows flanking the stage exit, broad-shouldered, earpieces glinting, eyes scanning the room with the practiced boredom of men paid to see everything. Delphine appeared at her elbow, pressing a folded bill into her palm. "Tip from table 12, she whispered. "And a warning, get home fast. The post's already outside." Eileen unfolded the $100 bill. Scrawled across Benjamin Franklin's face in black Sharpie. Asterisk, "You looked beautiful tonight. E.J. Asterisk." She crumpled it into her fist and left through the service corridor, the rose tucked into her sheet music satchel like contraband. Morning arrived in Washington Heights with the smell of burnt coffee and the one train screeching below her window. Eileen woke to her phone buzzing itself off the nightstand. Unknown numbers, Instagram notifications, a voicemail from her mother in Syracuse that began with a shriek. "Eileen Josephine, why is your face on page 6? She didn't need to open the link. She could already see the headline in her mind, bold and merciless. Instead, she pulled the blinds and stared at the Hudson glittering between buildings, trying to remember how to breathe. The article loaded anyway. Someone had airdropped it to the building's group chat. Mafia King Edward Jones claims mystery pianist in dramatic Velvet Monarch waltz. Asterisk sources say the untouchable crime lord staked a public claim on club employee Eileen J. O'Neill, 29, in front of 300 witnesses. He looked at her like she was the only person in the room, says one guest. Like he'd kill for her. Asterisk. Below the fold, a grainy photo. Edward's hand at her waist, her white gown flaring like a surrender flag, his tattooed neck stark against the spotlight. The comments were already a war zone. Heart eyes emojis tangled with skull emojis, society girls tagging each other with "is she even pretty though?" and anonymous accounts promising to dig up her dirt by noon. Eileen's stomach lurched. She deleted the apps, powered off the phone, and took the stairs instead of the elevator. 4 flights down to the lobby where a black Escalade idled at the curb, hazard lights blinking like a heartbeat. The driver wore mirrored sunglasses despite the overcast sky. "Miss O'Neill," he said, opening the rear door. "Mr. Jones insists." She almost laughed. Insists, as if she had a choice now. The Velvet Monarch looked different in daylight, smaller, almost shabby, the marble streaked with last night's spills. The cleaning crew parted for her like she carried a contagion. In the rehearsal room, her usual corner piano had been replaced with a Bosendorfer Imperial, its lid propped open like a black wing. A note taped to the fallboard. Asterisk for your hands only. E.J. Asterisk. She ripped it off and crumpled it with the $100 bill still in her pocket. Delphine burst in 10 minutes later, clutching 2 coffees and a look of pure panic. "They're calling you Cinderella with a body count," she hissed, shoving a latte into Eileen's hands. "TMZ has a drone shot of you leaving last night." And she lowered her voice. "2 of Jones's guys are posted outside the ladies' room. They asked me what time you take lunch." Eileen's laugh came out brittle. "I don't have lunch. You do now. With security." The first rehearsal was a disaster. Every note felt watched. The new piano's action was heavier than she was used to. Her fingers slipped on the low G, sending a dissonant clang through the room. One of the shadows, tall, buzz-cut, earpiece, stepped forward instinctively, then caught himself. Eileen played the phrase again, softer, until the mistake dissolved into the carpet. At noon, the Escalade took her to a boutique on Madison Avenue she'd never dared window shop. The saleswomen greeted her by name. By the time she emerged, she owned 7 new gowns, all ivory or champagne, all cut to skim the exact curve of her waist. The tags were already removed. Paid in full. Back at the club, the whispers had names now. His girl. The boss's woman. The untouchable pianist. They followed her from the green room to the stage, from the stage to the alley, where the same Escalade waited every night. She learned the driver's name was Luca, and that he never spoke unless spoken to. She learned the security rotation changed every 4 hours. She learned that her mail was being delivered to a P.O. box she'd never opened. On the 5th night, Edward appeared during soundcheck. He moved like a man who owned gravity. No entourage this time, just him in a charcoal suit, collar unbuttoned, the rose gold watch on his wrist catching the stage lights. He didn't sit. He stood at the edge of the pit, hands clasped behind his back, watching her run scales. Eileen's fingers faltered on a trill. She started again. "Play the Rachmaninoff prelude," he said. "Not a request." She did. The prelude in C-sharp minor, dark, brooding, impossible to play, without bleeding a little. When she finished, the silence felt surgical. "Again," he said softly. "Slower this time. Let it breathe." She obeyed. Halfway through the second repetition, she felt him behind her, close enough to smell cedar and gun oil. His hand settled on the piano's curve, not touching her, but near enough that the heat of his skin warmed the air between them. "You're angry," he observed. "I'm adjusting." "To what?" She stopped playing. The final chord hung unresolved. "To begin a headline. To gowns I didn't choose. To shadows who know my menstrual cycle." A flicker of something amusement crossed his face. "The gowns suit you. They're not me." "No," he agreed. "They're armor. The city's already trying to tear you apart. Let them bruise silk instead of skin." He stepped closer. His reflection ghosted across the piano's polished lid, tattooed neck, unreadable eyes. "You're safe now, Eileen." "Safe," she echoed. The word tasted like rust. "From the heir who grabbed me? Or from the man who grabbed me harder?" His jaw tightened. For a moment, she thought he'd walk away. Instead, he reached into his jacket and produced a small velvet box. Inside, a platinum bracelet, delicate as frost, set with a single black diamond. "A gift," he said, "not a chain." She stared at it. "Everything you touch becomes a chain." He closed the box and slipped it into her hand anyway. "Then wear it until you believe otherwise." That night, the bracelet stayed in her pocket. She played the prelude 3 times, each slower, darker, until the final chord dissolved into the club's hush. Edward watched from the wings, unmoving. When the house lights came up, he was gone. The renovations began on a Tuesday. Eileen came home to find her apartment door ajar, the smell of fresh paint thick in the hallway. Inside, new hardwood floors, a kitchen island where her card table used to be, a security system blinking red on the wall. The super shrugged when she cornered him. Mr. Jones's people said it was a safety upgrade. Her mattress had been replaced with something plush and obscene. On the nightstand, a vase of white roses and a card in the same sharp script. Asterisk, sleep well. E.J. Asterisk. She slept on the couch instead, bracelet clenched in her fist like a worry stone. 10 days after the dance, the city's obsession metastasized. A gossip podcast devoted an entire episode to the pianist and the Prince of Darkness. A fashion blogger ranked her new money glow-up against old money heiresses. Someone doxed her Juilliard transcripts. Her mother left 7 voicemails in one afternoon, each more hysterical than the last. Eileen stopped answering the phone. At the club, the security doubled. Luca now waited inside the lobby of her building. A second car followed the Escalade at a discreet distance. She learned to spot the tails, same gray sedan, different plates every day. Edward's visits became a ritual. Always during rehearsal, always silent at first. He'd lean against the wall, arms crossed, listening until she finished a piece. Then, again, with more pedal. Let the left hand sing. Sometimes he brought sheet music, rare editions, annotations in his own hand. Once, a first edition Chopin nocturne wrapped in acid-free paper. She played it until her fingers cramped, until the notes felt like confessions. One afternoon, Rain lashed the club's skylights. The rehearsal room was empty except for them. Eileen closed the fall board. Done for the day. Edward didn't move. You haven't worn the bracelet. I don't wear gifts from men who renovate my life without asking. He studied her for a long moment. Then, quietly, no one touches what's mine. The words landed between them like a gauntlet. Eileen's pulse stuttered, half fear, half something warmer and far more dangerous. I'm not a possession, she said. No, he agreed. Your decision. He left before she could ask what he meant. That night, she wore the bracelet. It caught the spotlight like a shard of night sky. The crowd noticed, whispers rippling outward like rings in water. Edward watched from his booth, expression unreadable. When she finished her set, he sent Luca with a single instruction: tell her the car will wait as long as she needs. She found him in the alley behind the club, rain misting his hair, city lights bleeding across wet pavement. He opened the Escalade's door himself. Get in, he said. We're not done talking. Eileen hesitated. The bracelet felt suddenly heavy. Where? Somewhere the city can't watch. She slid into the leather seat. The door closed with the finality of a vault. As the car pulled away from the curb, she caught their reflection in the tinted window. Edward's profile sharp against the neon, her own face pale and unfamiliar. The dance had ended hours ago, but the music hadn't stopped playing in her head. Somewhere between the meatpacking district and whatever came next, Eileen realized the truth. Protection and possession weren't opposites. They were the same note, played in different octaves. And she had taken his hand. The city blurred into a single, relentless chord. Weeks folded into one another like the pages of a score she no longer chose to play. The velvet monarch swallowed her nights. The Escalade swallowed her dawns. Piano keys, crystal glass, the hush between sets, Edward's gaze. These became the only measures she could still count. She learned the rhythm of surveillance the way a musician learns a difficult time signature. A man in a charcoal peacoat reading the same post on the Uptown 1 train 3 mornings in a row. A woman with a severe bun and earbuds that never played music, always 2 tables back at the Washington Heights bodega. A delivery cyclist who circled her block at 2:17 a.m. every night. She closed the club. Faces that dissolved the instant she turned. Edward's men. Always watching. She began timing her exits to throw them off. Left through the kitchen, the loading dock, the fire stairs that smelled of bleach and old smoke. But the Escalade was always there, engine idling like a patient predator. Luca never blinked when she appeared from a different door. He simply opened the rear door and said, "Evening, Miss O'Neill." One Thursday, the sky cracked open with sleet. The club was half empty, the jazz trio phoning it in. Eileen played the second set on autopilot, fingers moving through Debussy while her mind catalogued the new shadows. Buzzcut in the balcony, left hand never far from his waistband. Redhead in the emerald dress, checking her phone every 30 seconds. The bartender, who now poured her sparkling water without being asked. After the final chord, she found Edward waiting in the wings, coat collar turned up against a draft. "Ride with me," he said. Not a question. They drove north along the Hudson, wipers slicing the sleet into silver arcs. He didn't speak until the car turned onto the Henry Hudson Parkway. "You've been avoiding the car. I've been avoiding cages." A pause. "You think I'm the cage? I think you built it around me." He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time she saw exhaustion in the set of his shoulders. "You're safer this way," he said simply. Safe from what? His pause lasted too long. The city lights strobed across his face. "From people who'd use you to hurt me." The words landed like a wrong note in a perfect cadence. She stared at the bracelet on her wrist, black diamond catching the passing headlights like a warning. "Who?" she pressed. "Everyone," he said. "The Vitalis want my ports. The Moretus want my clubs. The feds want my head on a platter. You're leveraged now, Eileen. Whether you asked for it or not." She laughed, sharp and humorless. "So, I'm collateral damage with a Bosendorfer. You're the only thing I can't afford to lose." The confession hung between them, fragile as the sleet melting on the windshield. She wanted to ask why her, why now, but the car was already pulling into the private garage beneath his Tribeca penthouse. The doors locked with a soft, expensive click. He began revealing fragments the way a cautious composer unveils a theme. Over late-night scotch in the rehearsal room, the Vitales run heroin through Red Hook. They smile at charity galas and slit throats in the same breath. In the back of the Escalade, city lights strobing. Marco Lane used to be my right hand. Now he's selling my routes to the highest bidder. Once, in the empty club after closing, his voice was barely louder than the hum of the refrigeration units. My father built this empire on blood. I thought I could wash it clean. I was wrong. Each revelation came gift-wrapped in protection. A new lock on her apartment door, biometric, impossible to pick. A discreet panic button installed beneath the piano lid. A burner phone that rang only once, Edward's voice on the other end. If you ever need me, press 1. But the protectiveness felt too personal, too laced with something that tasted like guilt. He flinched when she mentioned her mother's name. He knew her favorite tea, Earl Grey with a drop of honey, before she ever told him. He asked about her Juilliard audition piece the way a man asks about a scar he already knows the story of. She started watching him back. The photograph appeared on a night when the city held its breath between snowstorms. Edward had summoned her to his private study above the club, an area of dark wood and leather, windows overlooking the skyline like a general's war map. She brought the Macallan 25 he favored, 2 fingers, no ice, the way Luca had taught her. He was on the phone, voice low and lethal in Italian. She set the glass on the coaster, crystal on mahogany, the sound too loud in the hush. His eyes flicked to her, a silent wait. She nodded, drifting toward the bookshelf to give him the illusion of privacy. That's when she saw it. Half buried beneath a stack of shipping manifests, the corner of a silver frame glinting like a secret. She shouldn't have looked. But her fingers moved before her brain caught up, sliding the papers aside. 2 men. Edward, younger, maybe 25, hair longer, smile easier, arms slung around the shoulders of another man. The other man wore a leather jacket and a grin that stopped Eileen's heart. Caleb Rivers. Her Caleb. The fiancé who vanished 3 years ago after a whispered phone call. Asterisk, I have to go out. Don't wait up, asterisk. Leaving nothing but an empty side of the bed and a cold case file. They stood in front of a warehouse door marked Jones Imports. Caleb's hand rested on Edward's shoulder like they were brothers. Edward's eyes, even then, held the same unreadable storm. Her breath fractured. The room tilted. The glass slipped from her numb fingers and shattered against the hardwood, amber liquid spidering across the floor like blood. Edward ended the call with a curt asterisk, Domani. Asterisk. Eileen. He was across the room in 3 strides, gripping her shoulders. What did you? She shoved the photo at him. Her hand shook so violently the frame rattled. Explain. His face went still. Not cold. Asterisk empty star. Like someone had pulled the plug on every emotion he'd ever learned to hide. Where did you? Don't. Her voice cracked like a crystal. Don't lie. Not about this. He took the photograph gently, as if it might bite. His thumb brushed Caleb's face, a gesture so tender it felt obscene. I can explain, he said. Then do it. Not here. He led her to the window. Below, Manhattan glittered like a circuit board. Snow had started to fall, fat flakes drifting past the glass. Caleb worked for me, he began. 3 years ago. He was brilliant, numbers, routes, knew every customs agent from here to Naples. I trusted him. Eileen's laugh was a broken thing. You trusted him? He was going to propose. We had a venue. A date. And then she gestured at the city, at the void where Caleb used to be. Vanished. Edward's reflection in the glass looked older suddenly. There was a shipment. Heroin. The Vitales claimed it was short. They said Caleb skimmed. I didn't believe them. But the evidence, he trailed off. I gave the order. The words detonated between them. Order. Not accident. Not disappearance. Order. You killed him. Her voice was barely air. I thought he betrayed me. Edward turned to her, eyes raw. I was wrong. The room spun. She gripped the window ledge to stay upright. Snow blurred the skyline into watercolor. Wrong, she echoed. You murdered the man I loved because you were wrong? He didn't flinch. Yes. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Somewhere below, a siren wailed uptown. Why tell me now? She whispered. Because you deserve the truth. And because... His voice cracked, the first fracture she'd ever heard. Because I've been trying to keep you safe from the man who gave that order. From me. She stared at him, at the man who'd renovated her apartment, who sent roses, who watched her play like she was the only light in his darkness. Every gift, every shadow, every again, slower. Not love. Atonement. The bracelet on her wrist suddenly burned. She clawed it off, the clasp snapping, black diamonds skittering across the floor to join the shattered glass. Get out, she said. Eileen. Asterisk out. Asterisk. He went. The door closed with the softness of a coffin lid. She stood in the wreckage of crystal and truth until the snow stopped falling. Then she picked up the photograph, Caleb's smile frozen forever beside the man who'd erased him. Her fingers left bloody prints on the frame. Glass had sliced her palm, but she hadn't felt it. Downstairs, the Escalade idled as always. Luca opened the door. Miss O'Neill. Take me home, she said. And tell your boss I quit. The car pulled away from the curb. In the rearview mirror, she saw Edward's silhouette in the study window, unmoving, snow gathering on his shoulders like ash. The chains she'd felt for weeks? They weren't around her wrists. They'd been around him. And now they were broken. The rain came down in sheets the night she fled. Eileen burst through the service door of the Velvet Monarch and didn't look back. Her heels, borrowed ivory pumps she hadn't paid for, clacked against the wet cobblestones of Gansevoort Street, echoing like gunshots in the narrow alley. The city swallowed her, neon bleeding into puddles, taxi horns blaring uptown, the Hudson's chill seeping through her thin coat. She ran until her lungs burned, and the club's golden glow was nothing but a smear behind her. She didn't take the Escalade. Luca's silhouette stood by the curb, umbrella useless against the downpour, but she veered left into the maze of the meatpacking district, ducking under awnings and through construction scaffolding. The shadows that had trailed her for weeks were gone. Or perhaps they let her go. Edward's orders, maybe. Or maybe they knew she was already broken. Memories flooded in with the rain. Caleb's last night. He'd kissed her forehead in their tiny Hell's Kitchen walk-up, the radiator clinking like a metronome. Late meeting, he'd said, tugging on his leather jacket. Don't wait up. She'd been practicing scales for a callback at Lincoln Center, fingers flying over the upright piano wedged between the couch and the fridge. He'd paused at the door, grinning. Play the Rachmaninoff for me when I get back. The one that makes you cry. She never played it again. The unanswered calls. Her texts. Asterisk, where are you? Asterisk, call me, I'm worried. Delivered, never read. The police detective who'd shrugged. Adults disappear, Miss O'Neill. No body, no crime. The cold silence that settled into her bones like frost. Now she knew why Edward's eyes had always looked haunted. Not power. Not desire. Guilt. She walked until her legs gave out, ending up on a bench in Hudson River Park, rain plastering her hair to her skull. The river churned black and furious, lights from New Jersey trembling on its surface. She hugged her knees, the photograph clutched in her coat pocket like a live grenade. Caleb's smile, Edward's arm around him, Jones Imports. She wanted to scream into the storm, but her voice had shattered with the glass. She didn't go home. Not to the renovated apartment with its biometric locks and stranger's mattress. Instead, she checked into a cash-only motel off the West Side Highway, the kind with flickering fluorescents and a clerk who didn't ask questions. She paid for 2 nights, locked the door, and sat on the lumpy bed staring at the photograph until dawn. Her phone stayed off. She imagined the headlines already rewriting her absence. Pianist vanishes after Mafia boss confession.
Let them.
She was done being a story.
He found her anyway.
The next night, rain still falling in relentless curtains, Eileen stepped out of the motel office with a paper cup of burnt coffee. And there he was, Edward H. Jones, soaked to the bone, suit clinging to his frame like a second skin. No Escalade. No Luca. Just him, standing beneath the buzzing motel sign, water dripping from his lashes. She froze. The coffee slipped from her fingers, splashing across the cracked pavement. He didn't move closer, didn't reach for her, just stood there, hands open at his sides, rain carving rivers down his tattooed neck. You deserve the truth, he said, voice raw, stripped of every layer of command. She laughed, sharp, incredulous. You think I haven't heard enough? Not all of it. I don't want it. You need it. She should have walked away. Should have called the cops, screamed, done something. But her feet carried her across the parking lot until they were inches apart, rain mingling with the tears she hadn't realized were falling. My apartment, she said finally. Not here. The walk to Washington Heights was silent except for the rain. Edward kept half a step behind her, never crowding, never touching. The doorman at her building, new, courtesy of Edward's upgrades, started to rise, but one look from his boss and he sat back down. The elevator ride was torture. Mirrored walls reflecting them both, her pale and shaking, him dripping and hollow-eyed. Inside the apartment, the renovations mocked her. The kitchen island gleamed under recessed lighting. The security panel blinked red. She flicked on the single bulb over the stove, casting the room in sickly yellow. Edward closed the door softly, water pooling at his feet.
Talk, she said.
He didn't sit. Didn't remove his coat. Just leaned against the counter, like a man awaiting execution. Caleb started with me right out of college, he began. Numbers genius. Could balance a ledger in his head, spot a discrepancy from across the room. I made him my logistics chief within a year. He was a ghost of a smile. He was loyal, brilliant, the brother I never had. Eileen's throat closed. She gripped the edge of the island, knuckles white. We had a shipment, heroin from Naples. The Vitales handled distribution. They claimed it came up short by 200 kilos. Caleb cooked the books, sold the difference. They had proof, wire transfers, forged signatures. I confronted him. Edward's voice cracked, the first fracture. He denied it, swore on his mother's grave. But the evidence, he swallowed. I gave the order. The words hung in the air like smoke. I had him taken to the docks. Red hook. Told my men to make it quick. His eyes met hers, ancient with regret. They dumped him in the river. I watched. Eileen's world cracked open. The room tilted, the floor rushing up. She caught herself on the counter, breath sawing in and out. You watched. I thought he betrayed me. You didn't ask? You didn't wait? I was 29. Arrogant. The Vitales were breathing down my neck. I chose the empire over the man. His voice broke entirely. And I was wrong. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The rain against the windows sounded like gunfire. 2 weeks later, he continued, barely audible. We found the real thief. One of the Vitales' own runners. Caleb had been set up to take the fall. By the time I knew, he spread his hands, helpless. He was gone. Eileen stared at him, at the man who'd sent roses, who'd watched her play like she was salvation. Every rehearsal, every again, slower. Every gift. Not love. Guilt. You've been watching me, she whispered. All this time. The dance. The bracelet. The apartment. It wasn't about me. It was always about you. His voice was ragged. I saw you at his funeral. You played the Rachmaninoff. The one he loved. I couldn't breathe. She remembered that day. The church in Brooklyn, rain then too. She'd played until her fingers bled, until the notes blurred with tears. She hadn't noticed the man in the back pew, face hidden by a fedora. I swore I'd keep you safe, he said. From my enemies. From the truth. From me. The dance. It was supposed to be one night. A shield. But then you looked at me like I wasn't a monster, and he stopped throat working. I fell. The confession detonated between them. Eileen's hand moved before her brain caught up. The slap cracked across his cheek, sharp and stunning. His head snapped to the side, but he didn't flinch, didn't raise a hand to defend himself. You took everything from me, she said, trembling so violently the words shook. My future. My family. My music. He turned back to her, cheek already blooming red. Then take what's left, he whispered. My name. My heart. My ruin. The offer hung in the air, obscene in its sincerity. She stared at him, at the man who'd ordered a death and carried the weight of it like a noose. At the man who'd built her a cage out of remorse. She walked past him, yanked open the door. Get out. He went. No protest. No plea. Just the soft click of the latch, the drip of rainwater on hardwood. She stood in the hallway long after his footsteps faded, the photograph still in her pocket, Caleb's smile burning a hole through her coat. Edward's words followed her like a second shadow. Take my ruin. She locked the door, slid down the wall, and cried until the rain stopped and the city held its breath. Outside, dawn crept over the Hudson, pale and merciless. Inside, Eileen J. O'Neill sat among the ghosts beneath her skin, wondering if forgiveness was just another word for surrender, and whether love, once poisoned by truth, could ever be anything but a wound. Eileen vanished the way a chord fades into silence, sudden, complete, impossible to follow. She left the renovated apartment with nothing but the photograph, Caleb's old leather jacket, and the clothes on her back. No note. No forwarding address. She powered off her phone, tossed the SIM into a storm drain on 181st Street, and took the A train south until the city blurred into anonymous lights. She slept in a Queens hostel under the name Clara Voss, paid cash for a week, and stared at the ceiling until the pattern of water stains became Caleb's smile. She didn't play. Not once. The silence in her fingers felt like amputation. Edward's world unraveled the way an empire does, one loose thread at a time. By the second day, Luca was chain-smoking in the club's alley, eyes bloodshot. The Escalade sat unused, wax cooling on its hood. Security feeds showed Eileen's apartment dark, the biometric lock untouched. Edward stood in the study where the glass had shattered, staring at the blood-stained photograph she'd left behind. His men avoided his gaze. By the fourth day, tension crackled like static. The Vitalis sent a courier with a single black rose and a note. Asterisk heard your pianist flew the coop. Careless. Asterisk. Marco Lane's name surfaced in intercepted calls, laughing, promising, circling like a shark. Edward stopped sleeping. He paced the penthouse at 3 a.m., scotch untouched, replaying the slap. The way her voice had cracked on you took everything. He sent men to every piano bar from Harlem to the Bowery. Nothing. On the sixth day, a whisper reached him from a bartender in Williamsburg, a woman matching Eileen's description, playing a battered upright in a dive bar for tips. Edward was there in 20 minutes, coat unbuttoned, heart hammering. The woman wasn't Eileen, just a ghost with similar hands. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit cafe on Atlantic Avenue, Marco Lane found her. He slid into the booth opposite her without asking, rain dripping from his trench coat. Mid-30s, lean as a switchblade, scar running through his left eyebrow like a lightning strike. He smelled of expensive cologne and old grudges. Eileen O'Neill, he said, voice smooth as oiled leather. Or should I say Clara Voss? She froze, coffee cup halfway to her lips. How? Edward's not the only one with eyes in this city. He pushed a manila folder across the table. Open it. Inside. Surveillance photos. Her at the hostel. Her buying a burner phone. Her staring at Caleb's photograph on a park bench. And one more grainy, time-stamped 3 years ago. Caleb, bound and gagged, kneeling on a red hook dock. Edward's silhouette in the background, hand raised in a gesture that needed no translation. Her stomach lurched. Where did you? I was there, Marco said. Second in command. I begged him to wait. He didn't. He leaned closer. He killed your fiancé, Eileen. And now he's trying to buy absolution with roses and grand pianos. You gonna let him? She stared at the photo until the edges blurred. What do you want? Revenge. He said it like a prayer. Help me bring him down, and I'll give you justice for Caleb. Real justice. Not this. He gestured vaguely. Penance theater. She should have walked away. Should have seen the hunger in his eyes, the way his fingers twitched toward the gun under his coat. But the seed was already planted. Edward doesn't get to atone by loving you. She returned on the 10th day. The Velvet Monarch was mid-rehearsal, the orchestra tuning like a nervous heartbeat. Eileen walked through the front doors in Caleb's old jacket, hair twisted into a knot, no makeup. The bracelet was gone. So was the fear. Delphine spotted her first. Jesus, Eileen. I'm back, she said simply. Tell Edward. He appeared within minutes, tie askew, eyes hollow. For a moment, he looked like a man seeing a ghost. Then relief flooded his face, raw and unguarded. You came back, he breathed. I needed time. Are you? I'm here, aren't I? He reached for her, then stopped himself. The apartment. I'll stay there. She met his gaze, steady. But on my terms. He nodded, wary but desperate. Anything. She moved back in that night. The apartment smelled of lemon polish and absence. She hung Caleb's jacket in the closet, placed the photograph face down on the dresser. Then she opened the Bosendorfer and played Rachmaninoff, the prelude Caleb loved. The notes filled the rooms like smoke. Edward knocked once, hesitant. Come in. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets. I didn't touch anything. Good. She closed the fallboard. I'm playing tonight. Full set. I'll be in the booth.
No, she said.
You'll be in the audience. Like everyone else. Something flickered in his eyes. Hope, maybe. Or fear. Behind soft smiles and rehearsed music, Eileen began to spy. She learned the rhythms of his world the way she'd once learned fingerings. The way Luca's left hand drifted to his waistband when certain names were mentioned. The coded phrases in Edward's phone calls. Asterisk the shipment's clean. Asterisk the Vitali boys asking questions. The safe behind the abstract painting in his study. Combination 27-14-09. Caleb's birthday. She realized with a twist in her gut. She fed Marco scraps. A photo of Edward's ledger, snapped with the burner phone. A recording of a late-night call. Asterisk Marco's moving product through the Bronx. We hit him first. Asterisk. A list of security rotations, memorized during rehearsals. Each betrayal was a note in a silent countdown. She played it on stage every night. Chopin's revolutionary etude, the left hand thundering like approaching footsteps. The audience thought it was passion. Edward thought it was forgiveness. He started leaving her gifts again. A first edition score of Debussy's Clair de Lune, annotated in pencil. A single white rose on the piano lid after every set. Once a note. Asterisk, I don't deserve you. But I'll spend my life trying. Asterisk. She kept them all. Evidence. Marco met her in a church basement in Little Italy, the air thick with incense and old sins. You're doing good, he said, sliding an envelope across the table. Inside, a flash drive. Plant this in his office. It'll clone his drives. Everything, accounts, routes, the Vitali hit list. And then we burn him. Marco's smile was all teeth. Publicly. You'll watch him fall, Eileen. For Caleb. She took the drive. That night, she wore it on a chain around her neck, hidden beneath her gown. Edward noticed the change. Not the spying. He was too relieved to question her return. But the music. You're playing angry, he said after a set, catching her in the wings. I'm playing alive, she corrected. He studied her, something wary creeping into his gaze. Are you? She smiled, soft, practiced lethal. Never better. The countdown reached its crescendo on a Friday in late November. The club was packed, the air electric with anticipation. Eileen wore ivory again, the gown Edward had bought her weeks ago. The flash drive pulsed against her sternum like a second heart. She opened with the Rachmaninoff prelude. The audience leaned forward as one. Edward watched from the booth, eyes never leaving her hands. She played it slower than ever. Each note a confession, each rest a betrayal. When the final chord was resolved, the room erupted. She stood, bowed, and met Edward's gaze across the sea of faces. Soon, she thought.
Soon.
Backstage, Marco's text lit up the burner. Midnight. His study. Bring the drive. Asterisk, asterisk. She slipped it into her pocket, fingers steady. The waltz had ended weeks ago, but the devil was still dancing. And this time she led. The city slid into December like a slow, minor key. Snow dusted the skylights of the Velvet Monarch, softening the neon into watercolor. Inside, the music was warmer, the crowds thicker, the nights longer. Eileen played as if the piano were the only honest thing left in her world. And Edward. Edward watched her like a man learning to pray. Their relationship deepened again, dangerously, the way frost creeps across glass, beautiful, inevitable, lethal. It began with small fractures in his armor. One night after closing, the club empty except for the low hum of refrigeration units, he found her at the Bosendorfer running scales in the dark. My mother used to play this, he said, voice barely louder than the sustained pedal. Chopin. Nocturne in E-flat. She'd sit at an upright in our kitchen in Little Italy, cigarette burning between her fingers, teaching me the difference between piano and pianissimo. Eileen's hands stilled. What happened to her?
Cancer.
When I was 12. My father said music was for women and funerals. Sold the piano the day after the burial. He didn't look at her when he said it. Just traced the grain of the piano lid like it might still hold his mother's fingerprints. Another night, in the Escalade idling outside her apartment, he rolled up his sleeve without being asked. The scar was a pale lightning bolt across his forearm, jagged, ugly, deliberate. Marco, he said. First year I took over. He wanted to prove loyalty. Carved his initials before I put a bullet in his thigh. Eileen's fingers hovered over the raised skin. You kept him anyway. I kept the lesson. Piece by piece, he fed her the empire that had hollowed him. How his father had built it on blood and bribes in the 80s. How Edward had inherited it at 23, a crown of thorns disguised as gold. How every deal, every death, every sleepless night had carved another chamber in the cavern where his soul used to be. Eileen listened. She hated that she listened, hated that she cared. Almost forgot the reason she came back. Almost. The kiss happened on a Tuesday, the city blanketed in the kind of silence that only heavy snow can buy. Rehearsal had run late, the orchestra wrestling with a new arrangement of Rhapsody in Blue. Edward waited in the wings as always, coat collar turned up, breath fogging in the chill. When the last musician left, he crossed the stage like a man walking into fire. Eileen closed the fallboard. I'm done. You're never done, he said. Not with Gershwin. She laughed, startled, genuine, and the sound cracked something open between them. He stopped an arm's length away. I used to think power was silence, he said. The ability to make a room hold its breath. But you, his voice dropped. You make the silence sing. She should have stepped back. Should have remembered the flash drive, Marco's texts, the countdown ticking in her veins. Instead she whispered, What do you want from me, Edward? Everything, he said. And nothing you're not ready to give. The distance closed like a fermata. His hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing the corner of her mouth. She felt the tremor in his fingers, the same tremor she'd seen the night he confessed. Their lips met slow, reluctant, burning with everything unsaid. Not a claim, a confession. He tasted like scotch and snow. She tasted like betrayal and forgiveness. When they pulled apart, forehead still touching, he whispered against her skin. You've haunted me for years, Eileen. Even before I knew your name. She closed her eyes, hating that her heart betrayed her. Hating that she believed him. Later that night, the club was a tomb. Snow muffled the city to a hush. Eileen moved through the corridors like a ghost, the flash drive on its chain cold against her sternum. She'd memorized the security rotation. Luca off at 2 a.m., the night guard's patrol route, the blind spot in the CCTV above the service elevator. Edward's study door was unlocked. He trusted her now. The thought twisted like a knife. The room smelled of cedar and old paper. Moonlight spilled through the windows, silvering the wreckage of their lives. The abstract painting askew, the safe behind it, the desk where the photograph had shattered. She powered on the desktop, fingers flying over the keys. The drive clicked into the port. Asterisk clone in progress. 12%. 24%. Asterisk. She opened the drawers while it worked. Shipping manifests. Burner phones. A ledger with Caleb's handwriting in the margins. Asterisk route 3 clear. Customs paid. Asterisk. Her throat closed. Then she saw the folder. Plain manila, unlabeled, tucked beneath a stack of contracts. She shouldn't have looked. But her hands moved like they had the night of the photograph. Inside, letters. Dozens of them. Handwritten, dated, addressed to each Jade. Oh, her initials, before he'd ever spoken her name. The first was from 18 months ago. Asterisk October 14th. The dive bar on the Atlantic. You played Billie Holiday like she was still alive. Your left hand trembled on the bridge. Nerves or cold. I wanted to buy you gloves. I left instead. Asterisk. Another, a year ago. Asterisk February 3rd. Lincoln Center lobby. You wore green. Laughed at something your friend said. The sound lodged in my chest like shrapnel. Asterisk. Another, 6 months before the dance. Asterisk June 27th. The Velvet Monarch. You sight-read my mother's Chopin. I stood in the shadows and cried like a child. You never saw me. Asterisk. Page after page. Her performances. Her habits. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when concentrating. The brand of tea she drank backstage. He'd been watching her long before the dance. Before Caleb's death. Before guilt had a name. Love, obsession, or both. The realization terrified her more than the lies. The drive beeped. 100% complete. She yanked it free, hands shaking so badly the chain snapped. The flash drive clattered to the floor. She was on her knees retrieving it when the door opened. Edward stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the hall light. Barefoot. Shirt unbuttoned. Eyes wide with something between hope and dread. You weren't in your apartment, he said. I came to check. She rose slowly. The letters clutched to her chest like a shield. How long? She asked. He didn't pretend to misunderstand. Since the first time I heard you play. A warehouse party in Red Hook.
Caleb brought me.
Said his girl was a genius. You were 19. I stood in the back and forgot how to breathe. The room spun. 19. Before Juilliard. Before the ring. Before the river. You knew me, she whispered. Before he died. I loved you, he corrected. Before I killed him. The confession hung between them, obscene in its purity. She looked at the letters, at the ink blurred by tears she hadn't noticed falling, at the man who'd built an empire on bodies and then tried to build her a cathedral out of remorse. I can't, her voice broke. I can't do this. She shoved the letters at him. They scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. He didn't move to pick them up. I'm not asking you to forgive me, he said. I'm asking you to let me try. She backed toward the door, the flash drive clenched in her fist. You don't get to decide what I need. I know.
His voice was raw.
But I need you to know it wasn't just guilt. It never was. She fled. Down the service stairs, through the alley, into the snow that had started to fall again. The flash drive burned against her palm. Marco's voice echoed in her head. Burn him. But Edward's words followed louder. You've haunted me for years.
She didn't go to Marco.
Not yet. She went to the river instead, stood on the pier where Caleb had died, and watched the snow melt into black water. The kiss lingered on her lips like a bruise. The letters weighed in her pocket like stones. Love, obsession, or both. She wasn't sure which terrified her more. But the countdown had changed its rhythm. And for the first time since she'd taken his hand, Eileen wasn't sure who was leading the dance. The velvet monarch transformed for the masquerade gala the way a cathedral dresses for midnight mass. Every surface gilded, every shadow deepened, every breath laced with incense and anticipation. Chandeliers dripped crystals like frozen tears. The marble floor reflected 1,000 masked faces in fractured light. The air glittered with deceit. Diamonds on throats that had ordered deaths, smiles hiding knives, champagne flutes chiming like tiny funeral bells. Eileen stood before the full-length mirror in the staff dressing room, silver mask cool against her fingertips. The gown was midnight blue velvet, cut low in the back, the skirt pooling like spilled ink. Delphine had laced her into it with trembling hands. "Are you sure about this?" the hostess whispered. "I'm sure," Eileen lied. Her heart pounded a staccato against her ribs. The flash drive was gone. Destroyed in the river the night, she fled Edward's study. But Marco didn't know that. He thought she was still his instrument, tuned for revenge. She slipped the silver mask over her face. It covered everything but her mouth and the scar on her left cheekbone, a childhood fall from a piano bench. The reflection staring back was a stranger.
Good.
She needed to be someone else tonight. The ballroom swallowed her. Hundreds of masks, Venetian, phantom, Baroque, swirled in a waltz of silk and secrets. The orchestra played Strauss, the blue Danube twisted into something darker, minor chords lurking beneath the major. Eileen moved through the crowd like a ghost, the blue gown brushing ankles, drawing glances she ignored. Edward stood at the far end, beneath the largest chandelier. His mask was simple black leather, molded to the planes of his face, leaving his mouth bare. The tuxedo was midnight like hers, the white rose in his lapel, the only light. He held a glass of champagne but didn't drink. His eyes scanned the room with the patience of a predator who already knew where the prey would run. She felt him before she saw him. That pull, that haunting. Their gazes locked across the sea of masks. For a heartbeat, the world stilled, the same way it had the night of the first dance. The orchestra faded. The chatter dissolved. Beneath the mask, his eyes found hers, gunmetal softened by something she couldn't name. He smiled faintly, unaware of her betrayal. The expression cracked her open. She was supposed to meet Marco in the East Corridor at 11:47. Supposed to give the signal, 3 taps on the service door. Supposed to watch Edward bleed out on the marble while the orchestra played on. But the smile undid her. Marco's men were already in position. She spotted them the way a musician spots a wrong note in a familiar score. The waiter with the 2 stiff shoulders, tray balanced wrong. The woman in the crimson gown, earpiece glinting beneath her curls. The violinist who kept glancing at his watch instead of the conductor. 11:42. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She drifted toward the East Corridor, the blue gown whispering like a confession. Marco waited in the shadows, masking a grotesque golden sun, eyes gleaming behind it. "You're late," he hissed. "Traffic," she lied. He pressed a small pistol into her hand, pearl-handled, cold as the river. "Insurance. If he doesn't go down clean, you finish it. For Caleb." She stared at the gun. Caleb's face flashed, smiling, alive, 19 and invincible. Edward's voice followed. "I loved you before I killed him." She slipped the pistol into her garter. 11:45. Back in the ballroom, the waltz reached its crescendo. Edward had moved to the center of the floor, alone, waiting for her. The orchestra paused, a breath before the final phrase. He extended his hand, palm up, the same gesture from the night everything began. She should have gone to Marco. Should have given the signal. Instead, her feet carried her across the marble, the blue gown trailing like a comet's tail. Couples parted. Masks turned. She placed her hand in his. The orchestra swelled. They danced. Not the stiff, formal steps of the gala, but something raw and reckless. His hand at her waist, her fingers on his shoulder, the masks inches apart. "You came," he murmured. "I never left," she whispered.
Lie. Truth. Both.
11:47. The East Corridor door creaked open. Marco's men fanned out, subtle, practiced, lethal. The waiter set down his tray. The violinist reached inside his case. Eileen's chest tightened with panic. She saw it play out in her mind. The flash of a muzzle, Edward's blood on the marble, the orchestra screaming into silence. She didn't want revenge anymore, not like this. She pulled Edward closer, lips to his ear. They're here. It's Marco. His body went rigid. Where? East corridor. 3 armed. More outside. He didn't ask how she knew.
Didn't ask why.
Just spun her once, using the turn to scan the room. His hand slid to the small of her back, where his own gun waited. 11:49. The first shot came from the balcony. Not Marco's men, Edward's. A warning. The chandelier exploded in a shower of crystal, raining light like shrapnel. Screams erupted. The orchestra scattered. Gunfire shattered the music, pop, 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 like a string of wrong notes. Chaos erupted. Glass, screams, blood. The waltz became a war. Edward shoved her behind the grand piano, wood splintering above their heads. Stay down. He drew his pistol, fired twice, precise, controlled. One of Marco's men dropped, crimson blooming across his white shirt. Eileen's ears rang. The silver mask slipped, cutting into her cheek. She tasted blood. Marco burst through the east corridor, golden mask cracked, eyes wild. Jones, he roared. This ends tonight. He raised his gun. Eileen didn't think. She yanked the pearl-handled pistol from her garter and fired. Once, into the ceiling. Plaster rained down. Marco's attention snapped to her. You bitch. Edward moved like lightning. Tackled Marco to the floor, fists flying, blood slicking the marble. Luca appeared from nowhere, taking down the violinist with a chokehold. Sirens wailed outside, close, too close. Eileen crawled through the wreckage, gown torn, knees bleeding. She found Edward pinning Marco, gun to his temple. Do it, Marco spat. She'll never forgive you anyway. Edward's hand trembled. Eileen touched his shoulder.
Don't, she said.
Not like this. He looked at her, really looked. The war paused. Police stormed in, shouting, weapons raised. Edward lowered the gun. Marco laughed, manic, as cuffs snapped around his wrists. Later, when the ballroom was cordoned off with yellow tape and the masks lay trampled underfoot, Edward found her on the stage. The silver mask was gone. So was his. Blood streaked his cheek, hers or Marco's. She couldn't tell. You saved me, he said. I saved us, she corrected. He reached for her, then stopped. The letters.
The drive.
You were. I was lost, she said. I found my way back. He studied her for a long moment, then softly, dance with me. Here. Here. The orchestra was gone. The chandeliers are dark. But he pulled her into his arms anyway, swaying to a melody only they could hear. Her head against his chest, his heartbeat steady under her ear. The war was over. The waltz had just begun. Smoke coiled through the chandeliers like ghosts released from their crystal cages. The velvet monarch, once a cathedral of glamour, now bled light and sound, shards of mirror glittering on the marble, champagne flutes shattered into lethal confetti, the orchestra's instruments abandoned mid-phrase. The blue Danube had died with the first gunshot. What remained was a cacophony of screams, barked orders, and the metallic tang of blood. Edward's hand clamped around Eileen's wrist, dragging her behind the grand piano as another bullet splintered the lid above their heads. The Bosendorfer groaned, a wounded animal. He pressed her into the narrow space between bench and body, his own frame a shield. Blood seeped through the shoulder of his tuxedo, dark, relentless, soaking the white rose in his lapel until it looked like a wound itself. The gunfire slowed to sporadic cracks. Marco's men were down or cuffed. Luca's voice cut through the chaos, coordinating with the SWAT team flooding the east corridor. But inside their makeshift bunker, the world narrowed to 2 heartbeats and the copper smell of fear. Edward's breath came ragged. He released her wrist only to cup her face, thumb smearing a streak of blood. Hers, his, it didn't matter. Across her cheek. Why? He rasped. Why did you warn me? Tears carved clean paths through the soot on her face. She laughed, a broken sound that belonged to neither of them. "Because I wanted you to feel what I felt," she said, voice trembling like a string about to snap. "Losing someone you love to power. To you, and now," she gestured at the ruin around them, the empire in flames. "Now you know." He stared at her for a long, broken moment. The mask was gone. The man beneath was raw, stripped of every defense. His eyes, gunmetal softened by grief, searched hers for absolution he didn't deserve. Then slowly he lowered the gun. The barrel clinked against the piano leg, a final, surrendered note. "It destroys everything," he said quietly. The words were not accusations. They were confessions. Sirens wailed outside, closer now, a chorus of judgment. Red and blue lights strobed through the shattered skylight, painting the ballroom in bruised colors. Boots thundered across marble. NYPD.
"Drop it."
Hands in the air. Edward didn't flinch. He stood, unarmed, palms open, as his empire collapsed around him. Luca tried to intervene. "Boss, we can still..." But Edward shook his head once. The gesture was regal in its finality. Officers swarmed, weapons trained, voices overlapping in a litany of rights and restraints. They cuffed him with the efficiency of men who'd practiced on lesser kings. Marco was dragged past, golden mask cracked in half, laughing like a madman. Edward didn't look at him. He looked only at Eileen. She had risen too, the blue gown torn at the hem, silver mask lost somewhere in the wreckage. Her hands trembled at her sides, but she didn't hide them. An officer moved to restrain her, asterisk possible accomplice asterisk, but Edward's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "She's with me. Let her go." The cop hesitated. Edward met his gaze, steady. "She saved lives tonight, including mine." The officer stepped back. Before they led him away, Edward turned to her one last time. The ballroom was a battlefield, bodies being zipped into bags, evidence markers dotting the floor like gravestones, the chandelier swaying drunkenly overhead. Yet in the eye of the storm, he asked, "One last dance." She nodded through tears. The officers paused, confused, maybe moved, forming a loose circle as if the request were sacred. There was no music, only the distant wail of sirens, the crackle of radios, the soft drip of blood from Edward's shoulder onto the marble. But he pulled her into the frame anyway, his cuffed hands awkward between them, her palms flat against his chest, where his heart thundered like a funeral drum. They swayed beneath shattered lights, her hands trembling against the wet fabric of his shirt. This time it was not a claim. It was surrender. The broken piano, lid cracked, strings exposed, gave a ghostly sigh as the wind shifted through the broken skylight. A single key depressed on its own, then another. Their songs. The Rachmaninoff prelude, slow and mournful, played by the ruin itself. A requiem for everything they could have been. Edward's forehead rested against hers. His voice was barely air. "I would have given it all up," he whispered. "The empire. The name. Every drop of blood. For 1 year with you. 1 month. 1 honest day." She closed her eyes. "I know." The confession hung between them, fragile as the crystal dust settled on their shoulders. An officer cleared his throat. "Time's up, Jones." Edward straightened, but didn't release her hands. "Play it again someday," he said. "The prelude. When you're happy. When you're free.
"Play it for me."
She couldn't speak, only nodded. They pulled him away then, through the wreckage, past the yellow tape, into the strobing night.
He didn't resist.
Didn't look back, but at the threshold he paused. The cuffs caught the light like shackles of ice. He lifted his bound hands in a small, courtly bow, the same gesture from the night of the first dance. Then he was gone. Eileen stood alone on the stage, the blue gown pooling around her like spilled midnight. The piano gave one final, dying note. She pressed her palm to the keys, ivory cool and slick with blood, and played the last measure herself. The sound echoed through the empty ballroom, fragile, defiant, eternal. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, the dance of death was over, and the music, broken, beautiful, hers, played on. 6 months later, the Velvet Monarch was a corpse in the meatpacking district. Plywood covered the arched windows like blindfolds. The marquee hung crooked, letters missing, spelling VLET Mon in a language no one spoke anymore. Graffiti bled across the marble steps. Tags, curses, a single white rose spray-painted at the door like a gravestone flower. The city had moved on, the way it always does, swallowing empires and scandals in the same gulp. Eileen had not gone back. Not once. She'd left the blue gown in a dumpster behind Penn Station, the silver mask in a Hudson River trash can. The Bosendorfer was seized with the rest of Edward's assets, auctioned to some hedge fund prince who'd never know the blood in its soundboard. She didn't fight for it. Some things were better buried. She took a cargo ship from Red Hook to Naples, paid in cash, no questions. From there, a rattling bus wound along the Amalfi coast, cliffs dropping into turquoise, lemon groves perfuming the air, the sea so bright it hurt to look at. She checked into the Hotel Santa Caterina under her own name, no alias, no disguise. The manager, a widow with kind eyes and a smoker's rasp, asked no questions about the faint scar on her cheek or the way her hands trembled when she signed the register. Just handed her the key to a corner room with a balcony and a baby grand that had seen better decades. Morning in Amalfi was a different kind of music. Sunlight spilled over white curtains, pooling on the terracotta floor like warm honey. The sea breathed through the open doors. Inhale, exhale, a rhythm older than sorrow. Eileen woke to it every day, the salt air scrubbing the city from her lungs. She played in the hotel's terrazza bar from noon to sunset. Not for tips, though the guests left them anyway, folded into the shape of cranes and hearts. She played because the piano was there, and the light was kind, and the music had finally stopped belonging to anyone but her. Her repertoire had changed. No more Rachmaninoff requiems, no Chopin revolutions. She opened with Debussy's arabesques, delicate, weightless, the notes floating like gulls over the water. Then Satie's gymnopédies, slow as the tide. Sometimes a Neapolitan folk song she'd learned from the kitchen staff, her left hand improvising a lazy tarantella while children danced on the tiles. Her music was lighter now, softer, free. The guests called her La Pianista Americana, with the sad eyes and the smile that came more often. She let them. She was done hiding. On the table beside the piano, the newspaper lay folded to the headline she'd read a dozen times. Former Mafia boss Edward H. Jones dies in custody. Assets seized. Charity fund established for victims. The article was clinical. Heart failure, federal prison, no foul play suspected. The charity bore his mother's name, * Maria Jones Foundation for Families of Violence, *. A final, quiet act of penance. Next to it, the envelope. Thick cream stock, her initials in a sharp, slanted script. H.J.O. She hadn't opened it for 3 days. Hadn't needed to. She knew what was inside. But this morning, the light was different, golden, forgiving. She slit the seal with a butter knife. Inside, Caleb's ring. Simple white gold, worn thin at the edges, the inside engraved forever, C. She'd buried it with him, or thought she had. The river had kept its secrets. And the letter. For the woman who made me remember I was human. E.J. No excuses. No pleas. Just that. Tears blurred her vision before she reached the second line. She didn't fight them. Let them fall onto the keys, salt water beating on ivory like morning dew. She placed the ring on the piano, middle C, where it caught the sun and threw a tiny rainbow across the wall. Then she pressed the first key. Their songs. The Rachmaninoff Prelude, * Prelude in C-sharp minor, * the one Caleb had loved, the one she'd played at his funeral, the one Edward had begged her to play again when she was happy. She played it now. Not slow and broken. Not a requiem.
Alive.
The left hand laid down the foundation, steady, unhurried, the bass notes rolling like waves against the cliffs. The right hand answered with the melody, clear, soaring, no longer trembling. She let the pedal blur the edges, let the harmony bloom into something new. Halfway through, she shifted, an improvisation, a Neapolitan cadence slipping in like sunlight through clouds. The song was theirs, but it was hers now. The terrazza had gone quiet. Guests paused with espresso cups halfway to their lips. A child stopped chasing pigeons. Even the sea seemed to listen. When the final chord resolved, not tragic, not triumphant, simply complete, the silence held for a beat. Then applause, soft and spontaneous, like rain on leaves.
Eileen didn't bow.
She looked out at the water, endless, unowned, free. The ring glinted on the piano lid, a small circle of light. For the first time, Eileen wasn't invisible anymore. She was not owned, not claimed, only seen. By the widow who brought her limoncello after sets. By the fisherman who left figs on the piano every morning. By the child who now knew every note of Claire de Lune by heart. And by the man who'd loved her enough to let her go. Later, when the sun dipped low and the sky turned the color of peach gelato, she walked the winding path to the water's edge. The ring was in her pocket now, warm from her skin. She stood at the railing where the cliffs met the sea, the same spot where she'd scattered Caleb's ashes, or what she'd thought were his ashes, 6 months ago. She took out the ring, held it to the light. Then, gently, she slipped it onto her right hand, ring finger but not the one that mattered. A promise, not a chain. The waves crashed below, relentless, forgiving. She closed her eyes and heard the music still playing inside her, lighter, softer, free. Her music, once bound by sorrow, finally belonged to her. And somewhere, in whatever came after empires and confessions and dances of death, Edward heard it too. The melody floated into the open sea. And for the first time, Eileen J. O'Neill played not for the dead, not for the haunted, not for the city that had tried to own her. She played for the woman she was becoming. If you enjoy this story, like, subscribe and share with others so they can learn too. See you in our next video.